I'm Nick Payton-Walsh in Beirut, and this is CNN.
Hello to you out there. It's Monday, October the 7th. I'm Nina Santos at CNN London.
And I'm Pauline Chu at CNN Hong Kong. Welcome to World Business Today. These are our top stories. A big economic summit gets going in Asia as a report shows more signs of slowing growth in the region.
The U.S. hasn't found a way out of its government shutdown, and what's more is it's edging ever closer towards an even bigger problem, namely running out of money.
It's the biggest diamond ever up for auction. Take a look, and it's yours if you've got $35 million to spare. But first, these are the top news stories we're following on CNN. Libya's interim government calls Saturday's capture of Abu Anas al-Libi by U.S. forces in Tripoli a kidnapping. It's demanding an explanation from Washington for the seizure of the man the U.S. suspects of being an al-Qaeda agent. The U.S. has wanted to capture al-Libi ever since the bombings of 2 U.S. embassies in Africa back in 1998. Officials say the target of another U.S. raid, this one in Somalia, was a commander of the militant group al-Shabaab known as Ikrima. U.S. Navy SEALs stormed the house they thought he was using on Saturday, but they pulled out after they came under heavy fire. It's not known yet if Ikrima was killed. Egypt's political crisis led to deadly violence on Sunday. More than 50 people were killed and more than 260 injured in clashes between police and Muslim Brotherhood supporters. Some protesters swam across the Nile River to escape arrest.
Heading back into the world of business news now, Pauline. The stock markets, well, they're not doing too well on this first session of the week. These are some of the heaviest losses that we've seen so far in October. Well, these indices trading in the red as Republicans and Democrats in Washington continue to spar over the issue of the government shutdown, which is now entering its 5th business day. And also, we've got the debt ceiling looming in around about 10 days from now. Investors looking ahead to a whole raft of indicators across the Eurozone, starting out with the Santos index. This is a key measure of investor confidence in the region, and investors and analysts expect that this will hopefully show signs of improving sentiment, though judging by the markets, well, there isn't much improving sentiment in today's session. Final figures for the Eurozone second quarter reading of GDP is due out. Hopefully no revisions expected to the original figure, which showed growth of 0.7%. Free trade talks between the EU and the United States, though, have been postponed, funnily enough, as the US government is in shutdown mode. So that is something that will also weigh in the back of investors' minds, namely anything that comes out on the political and economic arena, Pauline.
Well, Nina, here in the Asia-Pacific region, all the markets were lower on the same concerns over what's happening in Washington. The Nikkei ended down by about 1.25%. It hit a new low for the month. Now, this drop comes a day after the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe told the Financial Times that he expects labor reforms to take time, and he doesn't plan to introduce them into his next policy package, although they are key to his structural reforms. He says it's a very sensitive issue. Meanwhile, the main Aussie benchmark was down by 0.9%. This also is a new one-month low. Trading volumes are low today since it is a public holiday in several states there. And despite the spot price of gold moving up, there were still some steep losses in the mining sector today. The Seoul Kospi also down by about 0.1%. It falls below the 2,000-point mark. Tech stocks were up, including Samsung Electronics, which was leading the gains. It was up by about 1.3%, but it was not enough to counter the losses that we saw on the Kospi. The Hang Seng also down here in Hong Kong. The World Bank has lowered growth forecasts, by the way, for East Asia, and we'll have more on that in just a moment. Meanwhile, the airplane maker Airbus has said it has landed a huge order from Japan Airlines. Significantly, it's the first time the Japanese company has bought anything from Airbus because it's normally very loyal to Boeing. JAL is buying 31 A350s worth $9.5 billion at list prices. The actual prices are not being made public. The sale will dilute Boeing's dominance as a supplier to JAL and the Japanese market generally. So that is a significant development there in the aviation sector. Now, one of the key players is absent, but the show must go on. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC Leaders Summit, has begun in Bali, Indonesia, without the U.S. President Barack Obama. He, of course, is staying in Washington because of the government shutdown, and he sent Secretary Secretary of State John Kerry in his place. Now, this is one of the most important economic gatherings of the year. There are 21 members of APEC shown here in red on this map. Together, they have a population of about 3 billion people and generate a huge share of global trade and total output. A World Bank report released just today says the pace of growth is slowing in the developing countries of the APEC region, but they're still seeing faster growth than anywhere else in the world at an expected rate of 7.1% this year. Well, my colleague CNN's Anna Corin is covering the APEC summit there in Bali, and she joins us live now. Anna, what kind of impact are you seeing now that President Obama is not there?
Well, Pauline, I have to say that the big story of APEC is certainly that China is now in the box seat. You know, if President Obama had been here, he would have stolen the show, and this would have been very much a US-led APEC. Not this time round. Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, who will address APEC leaders a little later this afternoon, probably in the next hour, in fact, he is taking, centre stage, and this really goes against everything I think that America was hoping for. Obviously, that rebalance or Asia pivot, if you like, of their foreign policy. That was to counter China's rise in the region. And now, with the way that things have played out, with Obama having to stay in the United States due to the shutdown, China is in the box seat. Pauline, I think it's also worth noting that there is a concern that if America cannot deal with its business back home, then how can it possibly influence this part of the region?
Yeah, very good question. In fact, China and Japan are asking those questions because they hold huge amounts of U.S. Treasury debt. Now, let's talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is called the TPP. It has been discussed a lot this year. It's that free trade pact involving many countries on both sides of the Pacific. Japan just joined the talks this year. China is not included. How, in general, is the TPP progressing?
Yeah, slowly, Pauline, and I think there are concerns as to whether it will make its deadline at the end of the year. President Barack Obama, he was going to chair these meetings. I mean, this has been described as the 21st century trade agreement. It involves a dozen countries, as you mentioned, not China, but Japan joined those meetings back in July. Obviously, the idea to establish a free trade zone, but as I say, that is now being chaired not by the President of the United States, but rather the Prime Minister of New Zealand, John Key. So we'll see how things go. But obviously, APEC is very much about bringing down trade barriers and tariffs so as to improve relations, to improve growth, and to obviously improve competitiveness.
And I also want to ask you a little bit about what Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has said, because he is there at APEC. There's a lot going on in the Japanese economy. As you know, the Nikkei has done well. The yen has generally weakened for the year, which has helped businesses in Japan. What has he said also politically about what he wants to do to strengthen his ties to other countries in the region?
Well, I thought it was interesting, Pauline, that he basically came out and said that he's not necessarily ready to implement that third prong of Abenomics, which obviously would involve a real shake-up of the business culture in Japan. Obviously, a lot of these companies, they need to be restructured. People need to be retrenched. But this, as we know, having travelled to the region, Pauline, this is not part of the Japanese culture. But in saying that, Japan has really hit a bit of a growth spot of late, certainly since Prime Minister Shinzo Abe came into power. So this is something that he's trying to push, but he needs to get everybody involved so as to push through those reforms.
Yeah, and labor reforms is considered so important to the structural reforms because it is really tightly controlled and many workers are heavily protected there in the Japanese economy. Anna, thank you very much for your perspective there from Bali. That's Anna Corin covering the APEC summit there. Nina.
Pauline, the U.S. Commerce Secretary Penny Pritzker is also in Bali these days. She told CNN that despite the government shutdown in Washington, excuse me, many companies see the advantages of moving their operations towards the United States.
What you're seeing is both with American companies reshoring and foreign companies looking to do foreign direct investment in the United States. They're recognizing a couple of things. First of all, our low energy costs, our strong rule of law, our intellectual property protections, our flexible workforce. And they're saying, you know, geez, the Western Hemisphere is a great market. The United States is a great place to locate my plants and to do business.
Well, we've also been hearing from a number of business executives at APEC. John Rice is the vice chairman of General Electric, no less. He told us that although China is undergoing slow growth these days, it's still a key market for companies like his.
Actually, China in the 7 or 7.5% growth range is still a very good place for us to be. There's a big demand for infrastructure. There are hundreds of millions of people that need affordable, environmentally sustainable power and health care. And so for companies like ours, China continues to be a great place and a place where our long-term investment kind of profile doesn't change.
That's John Rice there from General Electric speaking to CNN at the APEC meeting in Bali.
Well, U.S. House Speaker John Boehner says America is heading for default. That's a scary thought. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew says he's already out of options to pay the nation's bills. We'll explore exactly what that means for investors just ahead.
In the next minute, the 47 babies born in Africa will open their eyes to a new world. And the 57 Africans who go online for the first time will see it in a new light too. In these 60 seconds, this continent will provide the world with 134 carats of diamonds and over 6,000 barrels of oil. In just 10 years, we'll have the world's youngest population living above this tremendous wealth. The question is, where will you be? Because for the 150 years we've been here, we're still amazed by what happens in a moment. They call it Africa, we call it home.
Barack Obama will be re-elected President of the United States.
There seems to be no pattern to the attacks unless they are designed to sow fear among the civilians.
This is the reality of what kids think about race.
This is CNN.
Hello and welcome back. US lawmakers are still blaming each other for the shutdown that has paralyzed much of the government for almost a week now. Well, that battle between Democrats and Republicans over the budget is now spilling over, and it's leaking into negotiations on the upcoming debt ceiling too. Republican John Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives, told ABC's This Week that America's credit rating is at risk if the White House won't address his party's concerns.
My goal here is not to have the United States default on their debt. My goal here is to have a serious conversation about those things that are driving the deficit and driving the debt up. And the president is risking default by not having a conversation with us.
Well, it's only 10 days before the US Treasury Department expects to hit that debt ceiling, the current legal limit of borrowing in the United States. And if they go over it, well, interest payments could jump, and that means the spectre of default, Pauline.
That happened back in May, but it's been using what it calls extraordinary measures to pay its bills since then. But as U.S. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew told CNN's Candy Crowley, that phrase is a little bit misleading.
Tuesday, I wrote to Congress saying I'd used my last extraordinary measures. I have no more. That means that on October 17th, we'll run out of the ability to borrow. We'll be left with some cash on hand. And I've told Congress it'll be roughly $30 billion. And $30 billion is a lot of money. But when you think about the cash flow of the government of the United States, we have individual days when our negative or positive cash flow is $50 or $60 billion. So $30 billion is not a responsible amount of cash to run the government on.
And Lew says that if it does come down to that, it would be a huge disaster for the U.S.
We've never gotten to the point where the United States government has operated without the ability to borrow. It's very dangerous. It's reckless because the reality is there are no good choices if we run out of borrowing capacity and we run out of cash. It will mean that the United States, for the first time since 1789, would be not paying its bills, hurting the full faith and credit because of a political decision.
So it's easy to spot the cloud hanging over the stock markets this week, isn't it? It hangs in Washington and perhaps elsewhere. But That's not all that's going on in the capital of the United States. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are also holding their annual meetings there. And on Tuesday, we'll get the IMF's take on the health of the global economy with its twice-yearly World Economic Report. That'll certainly provide some food for thought. And corporate's earnings season also kicks off this week. Aluminium giant Alcoa posts its results on Tuesday, kicking things off as it does each quarterly earnings season, as does Yum Brands. This is the company behind KFC and Pizza Hut. JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo start out the financial season reporting on Friday morning. And the minutes of the last month's Federal Reserve meeting will be closely scrutinised by investors because they're going to be looking for clues about when the Fed might start to ease back on its $85 billion worth of quantitative easing, or the money that it currently pumps into the US economy each month. The minutes are due out on Wednesday, and let's get more on what we can expect. Michael Hewson joins us now. He's a senior markets analyst for CMC Markets. He can talk about the Fed, but also about everything else. What's grabbing your attention? I assume that the Fed is also further down the line now. Really, at the moment, it's Washington.
Absolutely, Nina. Good morning. Yes, I mean, the cloud at the moment is really these protracted, or the protracted stalemate in the US Congress between John Boehner and President Obama. And the rhetoric has really been ratcheted up. And, you know, that really does make me concerned because I think the positions are really more polarised than ever now. And it's really going to make it extremely difficult for either side now to really back down from their respective positions. And I think that the markets are slightly underestimating, you know, the political wills at play here. And, you know, that for me is the real concern. It really wouldn't surprise me if we went beyond October the 17th.
OK, beyond October the 17th means that the United States could default on its debt. Realistically, though, they'll start to skip other payments before that, won't they?
I think they would have to. I mean, they'd have to pick and choose. And I think Moody's, indicated that that might not necessarily mean an automatic default. And I think, you know, you and I know, Nina, in terms of our own personal finances, sometimes we have to pick and choose what bills we pay and when. So I don't think when October the 17th comes, all hell's going to break loose. But at the end of the day, it certainly does a massive dent to the US's reputation, you know, sort of for fiscal responsibility, if you like. But more than that, you're absolutely right in what you say about the Fed. I think it's highly unlikely now that we're going to see any form of tapering before next year.
What are we talking about next year? March next year, perhaps even further? Because when Bernanke goes, and if Janet Yellen gets the job and she has some time to put her feet under the desk, she's not going to start tapering back straight away.
No, she's not, and she's only one person and one vote, and the FOMC committee is going to have a completely different look and feel from January next year. So there could be a possibility that they could taper straight away, especially if the makeup of the committee is slightly more hawkish than the current 11 voting members. And I think that's really the concern at the moment. I don't think anyone really knows, given the current rhetoric and the different rhetoric from various Fed presidents over the past few weeks, which way the Fed is going to sort of lean in terms of tapering its asset purchases. Now, later this week, we've got Charles Evans. We've also got James Bullard talking on the economy, and I think markets will be looking or paying particular attention, debt ceiling notwithstanding, at the tone of those two doves and you know, which way they're leaning with respect to tapering, because you may recall that James Bullard, the day after the FOMC meeting, said that the decision was finally balanced. I don't think it's going to be finally balanced anymore.
No, it certainly won't. Let's talk about how this is affecting the bond markets, though, briefly, Michael, because we talk about the stock markets, but it's not the stock markets that are affected by this, it's the bond markets. And if we see those US Treasuries rise, that could jeopardise the mortgage market in the United States. And we all know that the recent economic upswing is based largely on house prices.
Yes, it is, but the bond markets have actually been fairly sanguine about them, certainly at the long end. If you look at the long end in the 10-year, it's around about 2.62%, a lot lower than it was just prior to the Fed meeting in September. So at the moment, the bond market, especially at the longer end, doesn't appear to be too concerned about it. It's the shorter end that's starting to tighten a little bit, especially with respect to, you know, treasuries that actually roll over on around about October the 17th. So I think that's where we need to be really focusing our attention at the moment. I still think the bond market's fairly sanguine about it.
All right, Michael Hewson there, at CMC Markets. As always, thanks so much for coming on the show. Have a great rest of your trading week. Well, all that uncertainty surrounding the budget standoff in Washington has managed to weaken the US dollar in recent days. This is how the euro, the British pound and the yen are doing against the currency at the moment. The British pound continues its strong rise, currently trading at 160.04 at the moment. Japanese yen weakening a little bit against that on the back of what we've heard coming out of the third pillar of Shinzo Abe's Abenomics and economic reform. The euro, though, has been gaining against the US dollar. Pauline.
Well, Nina, with the prospect of the United States possibly running out of money to pay its bills looming large, other countries are watching this very closely, especially those who hold huge amounts of U.S. treasuries or U.S. debt. Now, the biggest foreign holder is China right here. In July of this year, it held almost $1.3 trillion worth of U.S. securities. Then Japan holds $1.1 trillion in U.S. treasuries. And other major investors include a group of 6 Caribbean banking centers like the Bahamas here, you can just see that right there, and the Cayman Islands, who some experts believe are actually hedge funds there that don't really want to reveal their positions. Now, a group of 15 oil exporting nations from across the Middle East, Africa, as well as Latin America are also big holders of U.S. debt, as well as Brazil. So, Nina, as you look at this map, it's not just a domestic issue in the U.S., it really is an issue that all of these creditor nations are watching very closely and hoping that political paralysis loosens up a little bit.
Yeah, and the multi-trillion-dollar question eventually becomes, as the largest creditor to the United States, will China start to put the squeeze on the U.S. so it doesn't go anywhere near defaulting its debt? Well, you heard Michael Houston talking about the treasuries. Yields on U.S. government bonds have been rising sharply in the past 6 months, particularly, as he was telling us, on what's called the short end of the curve. So we're talking about 2-year notes. Remember that a number of these treasuries go all the way from a year, 6 months, all the way over to 30 years. This is the mid-range that he was mentioning, the one that has seen some reaction, but he's been calling it slightly more sanguine because it hasn't spiked as much as the 2-year. Back on the 2nd of May, as you can see here on this chart, the 10-year note was actually only yielding just 1.66%. That was reflecting a rather benign environment as the United States was entering its recovery. So the lower the yield, this means the better the economy is doing, and also the lower interest rates are, and the lower they're likely to stay low. But as I want to show you here, it has soared around about 100 basis points in just 6 months or so. Now in September, we're talking about a yield of around about 2.9%. We're back down just a little bit, but again, if the spectre of default does become a realistic possibility, you can expect that to rise again. Why is this important? Well, because a lot of the mortgage market in the United States is actually based on these kind of prices rather than the actual Fed interest rate. And this is what some economists say could actually end up having a knock-on effect on the US housing market. Remember that the US housing market has been a pivotal support point for the US economy as it goes forward towards its recovery, Pauline.
Yeah, and so many Americans have their value and their income wrapped up in the value of their homes, so those interest rates are so critical. All right, well, we will be right back with more of World Business Today after this very short break.
Positive Transformations in association with Kirloskar.
This is the deepest submerged tunnel ever built in the world. It's 1.4 kilometers long, and depth is 56 meters underwater. Now, people are moving from one side to other side, mostly using the bridges with their cars or public transport. There are too many buses and cars, and makes a very big congestion. With this project, these congestions will end. The transportation means improvement in trade and also the improvement on the social life of the people. So 1 million passengers per day to travel will ease the life of citizens of Istanbul.
America's Chris DeMarco. Paul Casey lifts the Falcon Trophy. Martin Kamer goes wire to wire. Amazing! Kamer's done it again. Sensational scenes. Kaiser Kamer scores a hat. Bunkers, dancing, aces, and Rock slays the Giants. Extraordinary. Stars fall, new stars are born.
Exploring stars and nebulas under the night skies of Namibia. On the next Inside Africa, spend the night stargazing with astronomers and discover why Namibia is such a special place for cosmic exploration. Inside Africa, Wednesday only on CNN, in association with Zenith Bank. CNN original series Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Copenhagen.
Denmark is like the happiest place on earth.
Go on a culinary adventure through one of the best restaurants in the world. Pushing you to rethink what's edible.
It's like I've never tasted a green vegetable that good.
Where it comes from.
Let's grab a bunch of these for lunch, no?
And how it reflects the Danish landscape and culture.
Cheers.
Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Copenhagen, only on CNN.
Welcome back to World Business Today, live from Hong Kong and London. Let's turn to weather right now. As one typhoon dissipates over China, another powerful and dangerous one is now hitting Okinawa in Japan. Meteorologist Ivan Cabrera joins us live from the Weather Center with details on both storms. Ivan, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think in the next few hours we're going to get some pretty amazing pictures from Okinawa if the wind gusts that the stations there have been measuring are, my goodness, verified upwards of 150 to 200 kilometers per hour. We'll get to the storm in a second here, but I want to recap what's been happening because, of course, the story, if you have not been paying attention, has been Fito. This is the storm that made landfall through the overnight hours of Monday in China. 119 millimeters of water in some areas, 164, and a wind gust in excess of 120, which is the typhoon threshold. Let's take you to some of the pictures. My goodness, look at that. Just imagine. And this was, again, through Japan as the storm rolled through, because remember, Okinawa is now getting it again, the southern Ryukyu Islands here. Just incredible. Not recommended to be doing that. That is dangerous stuff. Sure, you can stand up maybe, but there are going to be flying debris that can certainly kill you if you are not careful. So there it is, something not to do. Behind me, you'll be able to see the two storms here, one dissipating over China. The next one is right over Okinawa. And the eye wall, the inner circle, the winds estimated at 215 kilometers per hour. And actually, some of the stations reporting upwards of 200. Making that pass right through the northern part of the island. 260 kilometer per hour wind gusts. There you see some of the winds on the outer extremes of the storm as it continues heading off towards the northwest. Now, this is not, unlike the last typhoon, going into China. This is going to curve up and around. It's going to head up towards the Korean peninsula with some very gusty winds there in about 24, 36 hours, and then hook to the right into Japan. For Japan, mainland Japan, is going to be a rainstorm here. I think southern Korea, southern parts of the Korean peninsula here certainly could be dealing with some dangerous winds as well over the next couple of days. So we'll keep you posted. As soon as we get any pictures from Okinawa, we'll let you know. Here's the radar perspective from the Japan Meteorological Agency. Look at that. There's Okinawa, and there's that ring. That's what contains those 200-kilometer-plus winds. That center now moving away from the island, so conditions will begin to improve, say, in the next 6 hours.
So they will improve, but it's still looking very ominous there behind you. All right, Ivan, thank you very much for keeping your eye on both those storms. And coming up next, CNN has an exclusive look at where the world's money is actually made. We take you behind the scenes of the English printing press that is doling out banknotes for more than 150 currencies. Stay with us.
Welcome to the world's 9th largest country, seated in the heart of the Eurasian continent. To the country that has access to a potential market of 500 million people. To Central Asia's strongest economy with the most attractive tax climate in the Commonwealth of Independent States and Eastern Europe. Make use of the state program of accelerated industrialization that made us number 10 in the World Investor Protection List. Join those who are already joining this. Discover, explore, invest in Kazakhstan.
New perspectives, new ideas, new voices. QF Radio. Find your frequency.
Every country has an identity, a history, customs, culture. A unique landscape that determines how its people live, work, and play. Now get an insider's look at some of the world's most incredible places. CNN's On the Road. This week, from homegrown architecture to high-flying photography, explore Indonesia. On the Road. All this week in News Stream on CNN.
This month on CNN Business Traveler.
There's a tendency for you to need to slow down.
We're learning how to chill out.
Music.
With experts in packing.
The tighter I roll them, the less the wrinkles.
Organization.
Everybody feels overwhelmed.
And meditation.
And just let go.
It's the Road Warrior's Guide to the Art of Calm. Good night.
Catch CNN Business Traveller Thursday on CNN in association with Invest Macedonia and Macedonia Tourism.
I'm Ben Wiedemann in Rome, and this is CNN.
Live from CNN Hong Kong, I'm Pauline Chu.
And I'm Nina Dos Santos at CNN London. And warm welcome back, everyone, to World Business Today. So we're 90 minutes into the trading session so far. The US debt ceiling stalemate is taking its toll on these markets because it's now entering its second business week. So we're on to day 5 of the business days that the federal government has been shut down. The final figures for the Eurozone second quarter GDP are due in a moment's time. No revisions expected to the original figure, which was for growth of 0.7%. If, of course, there is any kind of revision downwards, well, that would affect some of the markets. As you can see, we haven't seen these kind of losses, particularly on the Eurozone markets, for a couple of weeks or so. So well down in excess of 1% in just the first hour of trading. Free trade talks between the EU and the United States, it seems, have now been postponed. That was a key factor that a lot of Eurozone economies were helping to boost their economies and bring them out of the current impasse that they've been in for 3 or 4 years now. Key data is also due out of the United Kingdom, so this market, the FTSE 100, could be sensitive to that ahead of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee meeting for the month of October. I might point out we've also had some housing figures in the UK that are coming out. The RICS, so Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors house price balance is out today, and that one looks at any changes in house prices. It's forecast to move up slightly. We're talking about a reading of 42 from 40, which isn't huge, but that one will be important when it comes out for that market, Pauline.
Yeah, still going in the right direction, however. But the indices here in the Asia-Pacific region are pointing down, also on concerns of what's going on Capitol Hill. The Nikkei down by about 1.25%. We were looking at a couple of shares today. Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, their shares dropped 7.6%. They're still dealing with news from last week that another leak had been discovered. Also, Japan Airlines rallied by about 3% today on news that it scored a big order with Airbus, which we had just reported in the last half hour. The main Aussie benchmark was down by about 0.9% today. This is nearly it was down by 1%. This is despite low trading volumes due to holiday closures in some states across Australia. Mining stocks were down in that sector. Investors are also looking ahead to the mainland markets, namely Shanghai opening back up tomorrow after a week-long holiday. Also, by the way, the World Bank slashed the growth forecast for East Asia to 7.1% for this year. And this is, of course, as the APEC summit is underway in Bali today. Nina.
Yeah, certainly plenty of trade talks there to talk about, even if the trade talks between the EU and the US are now on ice for the moment. Well, the US government shutdown is having all sorts of implications around the world. Also, the idea of whether Congress will manage to agree to raise the debt ceiling in about 10 days' time has been weighing on Wall Street. It weighed on Wall Street shares all throughout the course of the week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, this market really feeling the brunt of it, dropping 1.25% across the 5-day trading period. The S&P 500, the broader market, more or less flat on the week. But as you can see, the tech-heavy Nasdaq not doing too badly, managing to shrug things off. Andrew Sullivan from Equity Research, Kim Eng Securities told Andrew Stevens why the losses were relatively modest despite all of this kind of uncertainty.
Generally, the market expects a deal to be done. It's not expecting the US to default, and we still, at the end of the day, have a week for them to come to an agreement on it. And over the weekend, we've seen some sort of cracking in the Tea Party, so that probably makes the likelihood of a deal more likely.
So you don't expect it to have a major impact if things go according to what you expect them to this week either?
I think the market's expecting there to be a deal, and it's looking for signs of that. And I guess that in the past they have come to a deal, be it a good one or a poor one. I mean, this is the result of the last time's deal, that it just got kicked down the road a bit further. So I don't think we're going to see a final settlement, but probably a little bit more of an extension.
Andrew Sullivan there from Kim Securities. Well, a new week is looming on Wall Street, just 5 hours away from now. Here's how the futures markets are faring, very much replicating the situation that we've seen across the European Union at the moment. Markets down in excess of around about 1%. If you look at the S&P 500 futures, it looks as though they may well tank at the open. And what's interesting is that even the Nasdaq, that has fared better, looks as though it might lose a similar amount when it gets going, Pauline.
Yeah, we see the concern growing there, even in the futures. Well, let's talk about money, but from a different perspective. There may be gridlock in Congress over the tight budget, but the Federal Reserve is still rolling out an upgraded $100 bill. It is set to hit circulation on Tuesday after years of production delays. The makeover of the Benjamin Franklin bill may have been expensive, but the changes to the bill are intended to improve security. You can expect to see a 3D security ribbon, as well as a color-changing ink. So there you have it, Nina.
Jazzy stuff. De La Rue is one of the world's largest money makers. The UK-based firm is involved in the production of more than 150 currencies worldwide. And CNN was granted exclusive access to its printing press. In fact, ours is the first camera ever to have been allowed into its coveted design centre. De La Rue's head of design, Alan Newman, showed us around.
Every banknote is individual. The banknote itself actually starts to speak about the culture of that particular country, and obviously many countries are proud of their cultural background, so it's important that we capture that in essence onto a banknote. The banknotes really is the calling card to the international market about what that country is really about. This is one of our house banknotes, which celebrates the 200-year anniversary of De La Rue. The heron was put on there to show some of the features on our polymer substrate, showing the clear substrate when it penetrates through, and therefore the heron's dipped his beak in through the water. This particular banknote is about flora and fauna of the UK, but you're trying to either capture technology, capturing famous or historic people, or capturing wildlife of that particular country. When we're designing banknotes, most banknotes stay in circulation between 7 and 10 years, so it needs to stand the test of time. The durability of these banknotes far outstretches that of paper. The number of security features that are typically within a banknote are around about 20 to 30, and those will be incorporated whether or not into the substrate, into the security thread, into different parts of the ink, again in different layers to try and deter the counterfeiter. We incorporate all of the security features into the banknote. So on this one here we have a transparent window, which is a security feature for polymer. And again, there's some covert features into the banknote as well, which when you expose the banknote to different types of light source will reveal some security features. There are effectively 3 levels. Level 1 are typically public recognition features. So, for instance, here we have this magnetic ink on it, and these are typically features that enable the public to determine that the banknote is genuine. Level 2 are security features that require some other teller assist, so they require either a UV lamp or a microscope to actually examine the banknote. And then level 3 security features, sometimes they're sleeper features which are not used or certainly not announced to the public. The central banks hold those features in reserve to be able to sort their banknotes out if there are counterfeiting issues. For a designer and working for De La Rue's, it's to show that the product that you're producing touches the lives of everybody every day. So most people have a product in their pocket, whether or not that'll be a banknote or a passport or a driving licence that's been designed and developed by De La Rue.
Right, well, CNN also got the chance to speak with the man at the helm of the De La Rue team in an exclusive one-on-one interview. Tim Cobbold is the chief executive of this currency maker, and he tells us that one of his top priorities is bringing banknotes up to speed to keep pace with, yes, you've guessed it, global politics. He sat down with CNN's Jim Bolden.
Well, that takes me to some of your customers, because you created a new currency for the new country of South Sudan in 2011, and that was a very quick turnaround. We've had regime change in Libya, for instance, and so you've had to go out and they've asked you to make new currency there.
Sure. So obviously everyone knows about the change that took place in Libya, and what followed on really quite swiftly after things began to settle in that country is that they recognised that they wanted to change the banknotes to reflect the new status quo, shall we say. And as a consequence of winning that business, we then worked very, very closely with the Central Bank of Libya, and in a period of nigh on 3.
We want to break away from this interview with the Deliveroo CEO and bring you back to Bali, Indonesia, where the APEC summit is going on. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is now addressing the summit there. Let's listen in.
Extraordinary, generous hospitality, and I think you will join me in feeling that they have been remarkable in their leadership in the course of this summit. So I thank them. Let me echo the regret President Obama expressed personally to President Yudhoyono that he could not be here this week. I know he really was looking forward genuinely to being here. I want you all to know that in 2004, obviously, I worked very, very hard to replace a president. This is not what I had in mind. But I also want to make it very clear to everybody, no one should mistake it again, but I guarantee you we will move beyond this, and we will move beyond it with strength and determination. One of the things that encourages me enormously is the recent news that the United States of America is now the world's largest energy, oil and gas supplier, and we are renewing manufacturing. Our innovation is strong, our debt is coming down, our deficit is coming down, and I am absolutely confident that the innovation and strength that has characterized our economy for some period of time will continue well beyond this moment being considerably forgotten by all of you. I want to emphasize that there is nothing that will shake the commitment of the United States to the rebalance to Asia that President Obama is leading. And I think it's fair to say to all of you that we are very, very proud to be a Pacific nation. We are inextricably linked to this region by ties of geography, of history, culture, economics, and frankly, the blood and the treasure that we expended to help lay the framework for the architecture on which prosperity is now being built. The Asia-Pacific region, which we are all part of, is by far the largest, the fastest growing, and the most dynamic economic region in the world. But in the 21st century, happily, our lives are defined not just by the work of troops or of diplomats, but increasingly by the efforts of entrepreneurs and executives of the private sector, of those of you and the businesses you build and the workers that you employ, the places that you invest, the partnerships that you forge, and the students who represent the future of this multinational, multicultural, and multi-generational relationship that is being that every one of you come here with a sense of excitement and a sense of the possibilities that come with that. Quite simply, how this region grows and how we engage the 2.7 billion customers who live here, that will shape the future of the world's economy. And the numbers tell a very important part of this story. More than half of global GDP is represented by this region. Half of global trade happens in this region. When you list the United States' top 10 trading partners, half are APEC economies. We send more than half of our exports to this region. And over the next 5 years, nearly half of all the economic growth that will happen outside of the United States will happen in the Asia-Pacific region. So if you put it all together, it is obvious why all of us, the private sector and the public sector, have a stake in the choices that we will make in the days ahead. But make no mistake, they are choices. And they will require the private sector and the public sector to work together like never before in order to make the right choices. As you know, when President Obama took office, the top priority had been creating new jobs and security for America's middle class. And he also knows that that can't happen and it won't happen, and to the degree it's happened, it hasn't happened without your participation. What you sell, what you buy, where you invest, these are all major parts of the equation. And that's why President Obama has worked hard to grow our exports by more than 50% since taking office, and two-way trade between the United States and other APEC economies has grown by nearly the same amount during the same period. Today, both American exports and American trade with APEC stands at record levels. Now, when I became Secretary of State, I reminded more than ever economic policy. National security is not just about the threats that we face, and we're all familiar with those threats, but it's about what we can do to prevent the seeds of tomorrow's threats from being planted today. In a world where vast populations of young people are exploding on the scene with aspirations and demands, all interconnected by the social media, at that time, anarchy and terror are sometimes offered as alternatives to the fulfillment of those jobs and opportunity, to the fulfillment of good governance. And so we have a special challenge, all of us together. Nobody's exempt. There's no business sector over here and government over here. It's joined together, and it is critical that we act together and work together. The consequences of failing to do so are staring at all of us in Syria, in Egypt, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other parts of the world, where young people, remember what happened in Tunisia was a reflection of the aspirations of a fruit vendor who rebelled against corruption simply because he wanted to be able to live his life and sell his goods. What happened in Tahrir Square was without any religious overtones or connotations. It was, again, young people texting each other, using smartphones, talking about the possibilities of the future. And so it was in Syria, too, where young people wanted a voice in the future and were met instead with violence. So I would say to you that with all of their potential, it screams for the chance to fulfill their basic aspirations, and that is what we have to think about even as we make bottom-line economic choices. So it is clear, we have a stake in each other's success. And that's one of the reasons why multilateral fora like APEC and ASEAN are frankly so important in this modern context. So critical. And to emphasize how critical it is, President Obama has sent our Secretary of Commerce, Penny Pritzker, who is here sitting in the front, and our U.S. Trade Representative, Ambassador Mike Froman, sitting over here, because we understand how critical this is. At its core, TPP is about generating growth for our economies and jobs for our people by unleashing a wave of investment and entrepreneurship all across the Asia-Pacific. And at a time when all of us seek strong and sustainable growth, TPP is creating a race to the top, not to the bottom. It's reaching for the highest standards of any trade agreement in history. And I will tell you that is good for businesses. It's good for workers. It's good for economics. It's good for stability. It's good for relationships between countries. It's important to remember that all of the impressive statistics that we cite about this region and all of the exciting projections about our shared future, they're not just an accident. APEC economies are thriving because over the last 25 years, countries of the region lowered barriers on trade and investment, and that has accelerated growth as much as any other single thing. APEC has played a critical role in that success by helping governments to align their standards and their practices, by lowering the barriers for women to be full participants, and by making it easier for businesses to reach across borders and find new markets. But the truth is, that is not enough. That alone will not produce success. In this constantly changing marketplace, governments have a huge responsibility to become even more agile, more responsible, and even more responsive to people and to the demands of the business community. And that means we need to listen carefully to all of you who are on the front lines, making the investments, making the need you, the leaders of commerce. We need your creativity as the drivers of gatherings like APEC and like the CEO Leaders Summit. And we need you to keep pushing governments forward and urging them to adapt. Just last night, I had the privilege of having dinner with a group of the CEOs, as many of you all did, and I listened to some of them express frustration with policymakers who accept in principle certain notions about how we should do business, but in practice often revert to other choices, including protectionism. Protectionism, my friends, is not a problem because it shuts someone out of the market, though that is a problem. Protectionism is a problem because it stifles opportunity, because it narrows the market, because it crushes the energy of the marketplace, where new solutions are created through that energy. And history has proven again and again, a freer market creates more opportunity, more growth, more dynamism, more innovation. And no one knows that better, I think, than the CEOs who are gathered here. But I also want to emphasize something. You've heard many speakers this week celebrate the economic vitality of this region, and well, they should. But I hope it's not a secret to say to you that there is nothing automatic that says that that will be the future. Nothing automatic. The prosperity that you share today and we are witnessing today did not arrive by accident, and neither is its continuance inevitable. You know as well as anyone that capital looking for a place to invest will seek either the fastest or the safest or a combination of the two for the return on investment, regardless of geography, regardless of nationality. Capital wants certainty in the political process. And the battle for the future is a battle about competitiveness. And part of what makes a region competitive for investors is obviously the consistent, predictable business climate that is conducive to success. There is no question that the most successful markets of the next 25 years will be determined in large measure by how well they demonstrate openness, transparency, inclusivity, and accountability. Now, I'm not talking just about high-minded principles. I'm talking about pragmatic choices that will define this region and other regions around the world. I'm talking about a path to long-term shared prosperity. In your businesses, you all know that connectivity and innovation are the key to success. And you know the kind of environment that you need for innovation to be able to thrive. In the United States, I'm proud to say to you, not arrogantly, but just as a matter, I think, of a reality, that the key to our productivity over the last 50 years has been the freedom of this innovation, the entrepreneurial spirit that allows somebody in America to take a risk and take a chance and to find a Google or a Apple or any other number of great businesses historically. That really is what has defined America, and it's the centerpiece of our continued growth and success even today. The gas that we are currently using from shale is the result of new technology, of pushing that curve. And our world-changing businesses and our world-class universities, schools like the one that drew Vishnu across the Pacific to study in Los Angeles, these are a critical component of our economic foundation. It has been proven again and again that the next innovation in technology or the next great stride in medicine is most likely to be created in countries where citizens are free to share ideas, move capital around, free to try new things, free to fail, and where the laws are clear and equitable, and where you know that the profits that flow from your ideas will be protected. In order for businesses to fully unlock the premise of the great Asia-Pacific market, or to realize the potential of a booming middle class, 1 billion people strong, we need updated rules that protect not just the basic decisions about moving goods and services.
You've been listening to U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry addressing world leaders there at the APEC summit in Bali in Indonesia. He was talking about the importance of trade ties between the U.S. and the Asia-Pacific region, and also warning against rules of protectionism. Of course, this is all under the cloud of the U.S. government shutdown because the U.S. President Barack Obama was supposed to be here. He had to cancel because of the situation on Capitol Hill. We will be following what's going on in Washington and also this APEC summit. But for now, that is it for this edition of World Business Today. Thank you for joining me and Nina. We hope to see you again in about 4 hours' time with the opening bell on Wall Street. CNN Newsroom is coming up next.
CNN original series Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Copenhagen.
Denmark is like the happiest place on earth.
Go on a culinary adventure through one of the best restaurants in the world.
Yes, sir.
Pushing you to rethink what's edible.
It's like I've never tasted a green vegetable that good.
Where it comes from.
Let's grab a bunch of these for lunch, no?
And how it reflects the Danish landscape and culture.
Cheers.
Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Copenhagen, only on CNN. This month on CNN Go, plunge into Dubai. From palm-shaped islands to the world's tallest building.
It's just absolutely amazing.
we travel through desert landscapes and dine at one of the world's finest restaurants. Explore the glitz and glamour of Dubai in a luxury edition of CNN Go. Wednesday on CNN.